and drops near enough that it does flow into Lake Enriquillo and Lake Azuei. So if it were true that sea temperatures rose and that created more evaporation, it would pretty much for sure be true, and we could assume it to be true, that would have caused the lakes to rise. So the key to figuring out this theory is determining, well, was it indeed did the sea temperatures rise? And if so, did rainfall rise as well? Those are two things that there are not measurements of. There are no weather stations around Lake Azuei in Haiti, and there aren't any very close ones around Lake Enriquillo to measure rain. So we have no way to measure the amount of rainfall and really know if rain has increased. Also, in terms of ocean temperatures, I mean, there's lots of data that exists, but it all has to be crunched and modeled, and CUNY University in New York is working to do that modeling to determine if sea temperatures did rise over this time. But unfortunately, because there's no rain data, it's hard to know. So finally, as of a couple years ago, Yolanda de Leon and Santo Domingo and CUNY in New York got some funding to install weather stations. So now what they're trying to do is measure ocean temperatures right now and measure rainfall right now. And if you put those together and you know ocean temperatures previously over the past 10 years, then the idea is you can control for previous rainfall, rainfall over the past 10 years and solve for X, solve for rainfall, and see if indeed this is all because of climate change, this is all because rising sea temperatures and increased rainfall. But again, there isn't yet data, there will be soon, hopefully, that will allow us to figure that out, allow these researchers to figure that out. But that's kind of what I think is the most legitimate theory. And so in order to get to that, I had to go through all these different theories and speak with lots of different professors, read all the different papers that have been done. And yeah, I wouldn't entirely rule out the other ones, especially the canals theory, and it's a little tricky to guess at how much of this water is making it to the lake. But yeah, I mean, the best science we know, the best argument we have is that it's climate related. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if there's no rain gauge, how do they publish in the almanacs the average rainfall of the country, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, they have.
Just guessing or what?
So, no, there is rainfall collection, all around the country. I mean, I guess it's small on a map, but the Dominican Republic, I mean, there's tons of rainfall sensors in many places across the Dominican Republic. But you have to remember, this was just a very small area. In fact, until the lake rose, there was no special need to have rainfall collection sensors there. No one ever thought it would be an issue. So it just so happens that there was really only one station, and it wasn't always functioning over the course of many years that was right around where the lakes were. And so it's kind of this problem where, like, years later, in hindsight, it would have been great to have just some sensors, some basic sensors could have told us a lot there. But they just didn't happen to be there. I mean, around a lot of the tourist areas and national parks where tourists go and things, there's more funding for those national parks. And so there's weather centers and that sort of thing. But there just never really was, unfortunately, here. And there never was on the Haitian side. Yeah, there just wasn't that. But now they've installed all sorts of things, and so they can try to look into the past and look backwards. Not just rainfall measuring units, but also humidity kind of things. They can tell you about the humidity in the air, which affects the amount of evaporation from the lakes. Because again, the lakes have no outlet to the ocean. Water doesn't leave the lakes except for evaporation. So there's no quick way to get the water down. But anyways, the reason this climate change theory is important is because it tells us what doesn't work, right? If it's true, it tells us that spending $400 million on a dam is not going to solve the problem. And it doesn't necessarily it isn't necessarily encouraging. It doesn't tell us how we can, by human engineering, solve the problem of the lakes. But at least it tells us that we need to start looking for alternatives and thinking much more widely about climate science and what we can do to mitigate climate change and rising sea levels, of course. This isn't new. I mean, this sort of thing is happening all over the world. The interesting thing about this case is that climate change around the world is mostly causing lakes to shrink. Like most lakes are shrinking because as temperatures rise, there's more evaporation. But here it's doing the opposite. And there's other examples, anomalies like that in the world where lakes are rising. but it kind of goes counterintuitive to climate change, which is why it took so long for people to arrive at this idea that, okay, maybe it is climate change, just because inherently people look at that and say, oh, it's rising, that has to be something else, it can't be climate change, which we've learned, people who study lakes around the world are actually learning a lot from this now that they believe it is climate change, and kind of changing the way they think about some of the other lake situations in the world right now because of this situation. Yeah.
I wondered, yeah, if these researchers are studying any other similar patterns or situations around the world.
The ones I spoke with are all, I mean, maybe in the past have studied other lakes, but they're all focused right now. There is a lot of research going now into the Dominican side of things. So I don't know, but speaking with them about what they know, I mean, they were telling me that, yeah, like lakes everywhere are shrinking. So it just didn't occur to people. People were hesitant to accept or fund research that would look into whether it's climate change, whether climate change is the cause of this, because of how unlikely that sounded. And so it's kind of a lesson in the idea that, that we need to be kind of aware of how little we know about climate change so that it can cause this sort of thing. So I'm trying to see if there's any other photos I wanted to show, but I'm just going to wrap up. I mean, what I wanted to just get into was a little bit of a discussion if people were interested about reporting on climate change and journalism and hear your thoughts about what's done right, what's done wrong. I have some of my ideas, but that's kind of what I'm interested in. This is the first major project I've done related to climate change. And I've had friends work on some really excellent projects. I had some friends work on the project that showed that ExxonMobil knew for decades back that oil production or the consumption of oil caused climate change. They knew this like 50 years ago, and they were pretending and kind of deleting their studies and pretending they didn't know that until recently. And so I had friends work on that, which is really interesting, showing, did Exxon in reports to the US government, intentionally downplay the climate change effect of oil, that sort of thing. So there's lots of reporting out there, but I'd love to hear your ideas of like what you enjoy from climate change reporting, or what challenges you see, or what you think stories like this, even I, could do better as I do more reporting on climate change. These are just some of the people I met along the way. But yeah, did you have a question or a thought? Yeah.
I have some questions.
Yeah.
We are curious going to the map.
Yes.
If you can, so I see there's like a smaller lane there, Laguna de Rincon.
Yes.
Where it's actually shrinking.
Yes.
And it could actually support the idea that water is going, from the river to that lake,
Yeah.
now diverting to the other river. Is that something?
Yes.
I was just thinking about that by looking at the map. So what can you say about that?
So the Dominican government dam theory theorizes that the water is coming into this lake and then draining into these lakes. But that's also a strange kind of unknown thing, is that exactly, you notice these dots were the original, these dots here show the original location of the lake. You see how it expanded there, or not the original, but at least 8 years ago. But yeah, this shows that this lake actually got smaller, which is what is expected from lakes, right? Like if this lake is unaffected, if it's true that this lake is unaffected by the ecosystem, it would actually make sense that over 10 years a lake could get significantly smaller because of higher temperatures in the air, which we do know exist, and that sort of thing, and evaporation. But yeah, there's a lot of debate over this lagoon and what that tells us or doesn't tell us. I don't know. People work into their own theories in different ways. The Dominican government says, yes, it's draining from there into the lakes. The climate scientists argue that, that this lake just happens to be doing what lakes normally do, and is unaffected by whatever it is. The mountains, yeah, how do I describe? Like most of the mountain ranges are, you kind of see on the map here and up here. So the rainfall that occurs, there's much more rain over here than over here. So some of the climate scientists would say, well, it's only natural that this would happen, and then it's unrelated. But, yeah.
I was sort of curious what, I imagine you interviewed local people,
Yeah.
what they think, because we had another woman give a lecture last week that had to do with climate change in Ecuador and Peru,
Yeah.
and the effects on their potato crops. And she was talking about how they themselves have been charting rainfall. I mean, they keep these meticulous records
Oh,
so
wow.
that they can, evaluate what climate change might be doing to their farming communities.
Yeah.
So they have sort of taken it upon themselves to actually create the data. And so I just sort of
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, mostly what I was doing actually was meeting with locals, And I didn't find anyone who was doing that. I met people from the local branch of the Ministry of Environment who were, giving me the data that they have, showing me the maps that they have. But individuals, didn't seem to be measuring this. And again, it was just so sudden. I mean, what would happen is a hurricane would hit, and then suddenly your land was underwater. This guy he's just a worker. He doesn't own any land. He was working on someone's farm and remembers the day that suddenly what was land became water. And he told me the story about running into the lake, what was now the lake, his land, his boss's land, and just grabbing sacks of beans and whatever, and just rushing them out before they were all ruined by the water. I mean, there was no sort of idea that this was going to happen, and there's no sort of warning. And so that's another complaint that a lot of people have, is saying, look, like we live in the Caribbean. We know about hurricanes. We know some of us have certain types of insurance, or we save money in case a hurricane hits. But people were so distressed about this fact that there was zero warning from government officials, that sort of thing. This wasn't predicted, or if it was, to the extent that it wasn't communicated. People just reacting to something that they had no idea was coming. It's not like hurricanes that they're going to come at some point. People had no idea, and so people like this, lost his job after that because his boss had no more land on which he could work. This is someone who lost her home. I'm trying to think if there's more. I met some people who had turned to fishing, that sort of thing. But I interviewed this guy. This is charcoal. Sorry, I should have pointed that out. This is a guy loading charcoal, actually on the Haitian side, into a boat to carry further into Haiti. But the charcoal came from the Dominican Republic. I interviewed a lot of these people. A lot of the people in the Dominican side believe in this canal theory, that it's just, more rainfall, more erosion, that sort of thing. But the researcher who has studied it says, most of these canals, all those little canals on the map, don't actually drain into the lake, it turns out. If you go out and walk around here, you'll see that by the time you get here, most of it's soaked up into agriculture. It's not like these are, on the map they look blue, but they're just kind of dry for most of the year, except when there's like a storm, essentially. It might look like this in reality right after a hurricane, but otherwise it just doesn't. It seems, at least the research that's been done kind of following these canals. So locals think, a lot of the locals think it's the canal. Admit, we have no idea, and no one else has, the government doesn't really have a sound idea either. So it's kind of a lot of unknowns, yeah.
There's something equally mysterious happened on the coast of Honduras.
Uh-huh.
After the storm, the whole village went underwater, and they had to rescue the people. And I asked them, well, how did they save themselves? And they said that the water that sunk the village wasn't from the ocean; it was from some other source that they don't even know about. So the reaction of the waves on the land causes land water to rise, and that could be another theory that you could consider.
Right, interesting. So for example, that when you've had a hurricane, that there's just all this water that maybe increases the water table, for example. Maybe. I don't know about that. I haven't heard that, but that could be. Yeah. That's interesting.
I
No.
was thinking, I'm not remotely a geologist, I know nothing about this, but
I never heard of it.
limestone, I've heard, can be pretty porous, and I was kind of wondering maybe after the earthquake, or maybe if there were almost the pre-shock before the earthquake, maybe there was some cracks in the limestone and water's like seeping in that way.
Yeah, it's not just you. There's so little is known about this all around the world, about how tectonic plates affect water tables and that thing. There's very little is known about that. And so, again, one of the theories being that that limestone, for the nature of limestone, would allow water underground to be going from this lake into that lake. So some people theorize that, but we don't know unless we drill a bunch of holes, right? So that is a theory that we just don't have the answer to, unfortunately.
That would account for why the water is breaking.
There's different theories to why it's brackish too. It has always been brackish, and so I think the original theory is, that the water in these lakes, originally some of the water was actually just existed as the land arose from the sea, millions of years ago. These are the island of Hispaniola and the Caribbean islands, the Antilles, were formed by tectonic plates, being pushed up essentially from the water. So one theory is that there's always been water here. Unlike glacial lakes here, which are, aren't salty because glaciers, don't hold salt. So when they melt, it's not, they're freshwater lakes that we have. Unlike that, here, the idea is, this was ocean water at one point, is originally the main theory. But yeah, there is some salt content in the ground, so maybe over time as more rain comes in, more of that salt is washed into the lake. Some people think that's a contributing factor, but yeah.
So where do the people in the Dominican Republic get their water from? Their drinking water? From lakes or rivers? Or?
Yeah, so there's actually lots of rivers in the Dominican Republic, and a couple dams and lakes, and so and places where I've lived. Yeah, the majority of people that I've seen, especially in the big cities, Santiago, I know Santo Domingo, it comes from the river. But in more rural areas, people do, have wells and that sort of thing. And Haiti also, both sides of the island have lots of fresh water. For being such a small space, they have tons of rivers, lots of fresh water. It's just a matter of how well that is captured and used, especially in Haiti, not very effectively still in a lot of the rural places.
Water, what's the source of their bottled water?
I know in the Dominican Republic, there's companies that bottle water on some of these rivers. I visited one. Actually, I think it's on this very river that they're going to dam, is that they bottle a lot of the water from up farther north on that river. So yeah, I think they bottle mostly from rivers, at least the places where I've seen bottling factories, yeah. I don't know all the details, but yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? We're running a little out of time, and I'd be more interested in your thoughts, but I wanted to mention some things that I think journalists we've done wrong in terms of covering climate science. Like, one thing obviously we've done wrong, or as in general, is focusing on the controversy of is climate change happening for far too long, for years if not decades after that should no longer have been the debate. And that's something that, of course, certain media, we still see that portrayed as the debate as a reflection of the politics, I think. But I think that, and a lot of times in journalism, I see this, people ask like, oh, what's your bias, or aren't you worried about bias, like on any kind of story. And I think that it's actually, I think worrying about bias in the traditional sense actually causes more problems than good, because when we think of bias, we say, oh, we want to give each side equal weight. Well, that's exactly what's gone wrong with climate change covered for so long. We say, we give weight to the Republican senator who wants to deny climate science equally as we give weight to science, right? So it's, I think in this attempt often that we have as journalists to be unbiased and give both sides of the story, we create what journalists call false bias. And I just think that's a huge problem. I think it's so important to have news outlets that are willing to follow the science and follow research and follow information and not feel like they have to temper that back and portray sides that aren't scientifically or rationally or economically legitimate. I think we've created a lot of problems by trying to be unbiased in that shallow kind of way. I think sometimes in climate stories it's too emotional. Like a lot of times it'll focus, on the people as it should, but it'll only focus on the people and won't focus on the system, won't focus on the theories about why climate change is happening, that sort of thing. So I think also, showing, okay, these people are victimized by this. Unfortunately, I think we're fatigued in a way of hearing stories about people being victimized by one thing or another, or affected by one thing or another, but don't roll that back to say, this is why it's important, or this is why this is our fault for emitting so much carbon, that this is happening. And so I think it's important to have individuals who are affected in stories, but I don't know if I like stories that focus just on that kind of end product of climate change. I think you need to roll back and start with, okay, what is happening? What are the theories about what's happening? Follow the research that's been done. What are the solutions that are proposed? And why do we think this solution may work? Why may this not? It's complicated, but I think we need to show people kind of chronologically how we got to a situation where this guy's out of a job and that sort of thing, yeah.
I wonder, maybe this is a topic really a little bit for your next discussion, but
Yeah.
when you're deciding where then you want to submit your articles, have it picked up, or where you're applying for grants, et cetera, do you specifically seek out only those types of publications? And would you, would you turn away an opportunity with, I'm not going to even name any publications, but some publication you feel like really doesn't speak to your own ethics about how you would,
Yeah, maybe there are some that I would turn away, but I would actually find more value in getting a story like this in a place like, some, well, I was going to say in a Murdoch-owned publication, but now Murdoch, as of a month ago, owns Nat Geo. But it's, to me, I think people reading National Geographic, I think National Geographic has done a very good job of translating climate change and climate science, relatively so, and kind of for a long time. And so actually, I would almost see more value in trying to get the story in a publication that hasn't done that, to try to shift their coverage in the right direction. Nat Geo is always going to do this sort of stuff, whether I propose it to them or not. I hope they continue to, but yeah, it would be good to, and maybe I should try harder in that in terms of looking at outlets that don't do a good job of it yet. Although not a lot of people are doing much better in recent years, I think, but only very recently. Yeah.
Your story brings back memory of a long stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Starting about 55 years ago in 1961, walking through the countryside of El Salvador, walking around Laguna de Chamico. And so there was this path, this road going on, and then it was under the water. And there were tree trunks that were also under the water. So what's here, what's going on? I talked to farmers around there and said, well, around the sort of 1930s, 1940s or so, that were relatively dry. And then there came this wetter thing, and what's this? Okay, then I carry on from there. Later on, then, yes. With gathering rain gauge stations from all over the Caribbean, not just El Salvador. Well, then we found, yes, indeed, there were the 40s, 50s, they were relatively wet, and then came a drier phase, well, a very wet one, and then the 70s sort of became drier again. Well, then, in a few years ago, I had this chance of teaching a course in El Salvador, and we got them called a rain gauge series, this time not the Caribbean as a whole, just the Central America. And there then this verified, and then the continuation, and here we get the maybe so curious. Then the rains became much more abundant again in the new millennium. After about 2000, just about what you had. So we studied the circulation mechanisms of the earlier thing, and we have an understanding how this goes. So really, on the whole thing, this is just MIT.
Yeah.
And it is part of the Greater Caribbean. It's some differences, but we'll hold in that. And there have been, over the decades, ups and downs of whole regimes, not necessarily now click from here on climate change. It's an ups and down in circulation regimes that have been there. And for me, the curious thing was just exactly what we had found for Central America when I read your abstract, that this increase here in the last 10 years, hell, that's exactly what we had. I brought you here Xerox copies of some journal papers in the National Journal of Climatology, and that's exactly how it goes. And well, there are circulation mechanisms from which this is understood. And
that's what makes it so difficult in terms of the climate science, is that climate works in cycles, right? The same thing, why it was so easy to deny, climate change and that sort of thing, is that, the nature of it is it's unpredictable and it goes in cycles. And so even in the Dominican Republic, some people say, well, the lake rose 80 years ago, 70 years ago. Some women in Haiti, elderly women in Haiti, are remembering, that it did. Now, we don't think it rose anywhere near this much, but so it's complicated because it's hard to know what factors to attribute to what.
The story of that lake, how it was in the 50s and how it was in the 60s.
There's no, right. The researchers go back and they've interviewed people who were living there at the time, but it's it's not. It's a little tough.
Rain gauges, if you maintain them over 100 years, you have the information.
Exactly.
If you don't do it, just install a quickie one for now. That doesn't.
That's what they're doing. Yeah, exactly what they're doing. Yeah. I don't know. Do you get?
I find it very much as a curious and interesting within a much larger context, spatially for one. And then also in terms of the long-term sort of changes of protracted regimes, fire and wetter things, of which we do understand the circulation mechanisms. And that, I think it's in that context that it's very interesting. One has to
Mhm.
If they're a bit more
Yeah. Are there news outlets, for example, that you or any of you follow that you think do a good job of, climate coverage and that sort of thing? I mean, I can mention some that I know I think do a good job, but none of them are really that mainstream, to be honest, and not that well known. But I wonder if people can think of great stories they've read recently that you think have done a good job, or publications that you think do a good job. I'd be curious.
We have another thing, if you can look into
Yeah.
this, the sub-Saharan West Africa.
Mhm.
It's also a matter of ups and downs, and it became dry sort of, in the 60s when the countries became independent, and there was blame on them that they don't know how to manage the thing, there was nothing with that. Well, then it sort of went, it didn't quite recover anymore. It got a little less dry than it was before, but never came back to a good regime. And we sort of have a notion of what the causes for that are. So, yeah, there is work of that underway.
Yeah, and the governance aspect is really interesting. When we talk about, obviously, food shortages and famines around the world, I mean, almost always, it's the vast majority of the causation for those is human, right? And
Well,
so
that was the thing in, with the beginning
It's just
of
a
the
book.
drought in the Sahel, It
Yeah.
had nothing to do with it.
right.
But
Right.
there were some very illustrious
Mhm.
academics.
Mhm. Well, it looks like we're running out of time. Were there any final thoughts or questions, or any thoughts on, especially on media? If now or later you had thoughts of outlets that cover things well, I'd really love to hear them. I don't know. Oh, which one? Yeah, .earth, right. I was going to mention .earth. Actually, I think
Yesterday, Andrew Rick was here yesterday.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Earth Day.
Ah.
So I don't know if
It was here,
Yeah,
in this room?
No, in the Monona Terrace.
Oh.
But he was here. But he told that I wonder if he would be interested
Yeah.
in, maybe he knows, but to see what his take is.
Yeah.
Because it's counterintuitive.
Mhm.
And also I don't know if you have a chance to talk with Carlos Arenas while you're here.
Oh, yeah. It's been some time.
Yeah,
But,
but
yeah.
he works in displacement solutions.
Okay, that's
for
interesting.
Climate change, sort of people that are displaced. So in this case, you can make the
Mhm.
connection that this has to do something with climate change, maybe extreme events that provoke this displacement in the lakes. That might be sort of.
Great, that's great.
Yeah, that was I was hoping that he would come today.
Okay.
But send him an email.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Even if you
Yeah.
further research to try to follow up on this?
I would like to, and really, I would like to do some research into the Dominican government dam project a little bit and look at what was known. I mean, I had spoken with a guy who helped draft that and persuade this dam to go through, and then he eventually stopped talking with me. I'd like to look into the whole governance side of that and how an issue like climate change or whatever, an issue like whatever this is kind of manipulated that way. If it is, I mean, this is, I guess, my theory, but if it is to do some major dam project, that sort of thing. So if I do further, I think it might focus less on the science and more just on, or the lack of science on the Dominican side and how that specific project went through, because I like to go and dig into kind of corruption and sort of things. But National Geographic, again, that's the problem with outlets. National Geographic is more interested in the science and wasn't as interested in the politics of that. Which I guess makes sense. But yeah, some other outlets I guess I could mention that I like for climate science. Climate Wire, which is run by E&E, Environment and Energy publication in DC. It's essentially this huge newsroom that's kind of the leading insider news outlet for anything energy or environment related. So you have to subscribe to it, but it's possible that university libraries or something here might have a subscription to that. They put some stuff out in the public, but yeah, E&E is the company. Environment and Energy, and then Climate Wire is one of their kind of verticals where they just have a team of people, on Capitol Hill and looking into research, looking into policy proposals and all that sort of stuff. So they're good if you can access them. Yale has Climate Connections, a website where they do a lot of good stuff. One of my favorite magazines is Pacific Standard Magazine. It used to be Miller McCune. It's out in Santa Barbara, I believe, and their whole thing is their journalism based entirely on research. And so all of their articles are just studies that they've taken and digested and translated and made interesting in a way to the public. So instead of journalism that's most common type of journalism, which is like start with a phenomenon or start with something interesting and then like try to find a little evidence to back it up or whatever. They do the really, what I think is the right kind of journalism, which is starting with research. A lot of it's behavioral economics, but they do environmental stuff. Looking at the papers that are being done and then kind of creating digestible, fun journalism out of that. So, I'm sorry?
That's climate correction.
No, that's Pacific Standard. Pacific Standard magazine. And it used to be called Miller McCune magazine. Yeah, they're really cheap. They come out 6 times a year, $15 for a year.